Hello again, and welcome to the third lecture in the Stranger lecture series. Today we're going to talk about The Stranger Part 1, Chapters 4, 5, and 6. So let's get started. So the overview for Chapter 4 is that Meursault and Marie enjoy some time together. A fight breaks out between Raymond and his girlfriend, the police arrive, and after Marie leaves, Raymond visits Meursault. He explains why he fought with his mistress and asks whether Meursault will serve as a character witness. Meursault agrees, why not? And they go into town and shoot pool. On their way home, they notice Salamano searching for his dog. Let's look at the quotations. On page 34, I picked out this quotation because I think it's a nice combination between Meursault's character as a sensual person and his relationship with Marie. So he says, "I wanted her so bad when I saw her in that pretty red and white striped dress and leather sandals. You could make out the shape of her firm breasts, and her tan made her face look like a hour." So, I think it's supposed to be say flower. A hour. I just went with that, didn't I? Her face looked like a flower. I copied and pasted some of these quotations from the PDF book, and sometimes the font makes a funny copy and paste, so that it should say look like a flower. So Meursault largely enjoys Marie's company because he thinks that she is beautiful, she's attractive, he is physically attracted to her, and she is interested in love. For him, I suppose this could be a kind of love, although he says that he doesn't think he loves her, he just enjoys her company. And here's another quote that discusses this issue. He desires her physically, and then a minute later she asked me if I loved her. I told her it didn't mean anything, but that I don't think so. She looked sad. So he doesn't express sadness, but she expresses sadness when he says he doesn't love her, because that's something that's important to her, but perhaps not to him. He thinks it doesn't matter. It's not meaningful. It doesn't mean anything. And this will bring up questions which I'm going to mention later, but, what do we expect and what should we expect out of a relationship? And even bigger than that, how does our philosophical worldview impact that? So do you have to believe that there's greater meaning in the world to have a meaningful relationship? And do you have to believe that there's greater meaning in the world to believe in love? And here we have another issue of meaning. So when the fight breaks out in the apartment complex, Marie asks Meursault to go find a policeman, but he says, "But I told her I didn't like cops." So there are many reasons for this, I'm sure, but one of the major ones is that authority is something that Meursault does not believe in. As an example of an existentialist or someone who thinks that the absurd is the way of the universe, authority figures are not real to Meursault. They're really just a nuisance. And on the other hand, for someone who's always concerned about people judging him, cops would not be his number one, place to go for comfort. But for someone like Marie, who's very comfortable with tradition, who believes in moral traditions, she's going to want to seek out cops. Nevertheless, the old man looked even more flustered. So here we're talking about Salamano. And Salamano loses his dog, and again we're dealing with this issue of moral authority. He says, "But they'll take him away from me, don't you see? If only somebody would take him in. But that's impossible. Everybody's disgusted by his scabs. The police will get him for sure." And then Meursault tells him to go to the pound and says that they'll give him back after he pays for him. And he gets mad. Pay money for that bastard? Ha! He can damn well die. So in an instant, you can see some of the absurdity of human emotions here. Salamano goes from loving this dog and being afraid that he's going to be taken away from him to saying, ha, he can die, I don't want to pay money for him. Which seems so strange, but we can't always understand people, and there isn't always a straight line from point A to point B with humans and meaning. And then there's another shift. He's looking down at the tips of his shoes, and his scabby hands are trembling, and he's looking down and he asks Meursault, "They're not going to take him away from me, are they, Monsieur Meursault? They'll give him back to me. Otherwise, what's going to happen to me?" So there's this uncertainty there, this sadness that his way of life is going to change. And Salamano is someone who likes certainty. Like many of us, we don't like not knowing. So this is a very scary thing for him, even though his relationship with the dog is tumultuous. Now, at the end of this chapter, Salamano is crying and Meursault overhears it. And it's a very interesting thing that Camus writes here. I'm going to read it to you. "And from the peculiar little noise coming through the partition, I realized he was crying. For some reason, I thought of Maman, but I had to get up early the next morning. I wasn't hungry, and I went to bed without any dinner." So I put this little meme in there because in this moment, there is a striking resemblance to emotion that Meursault experiences, but it's only a resemblance. He doesn't quite get there. He thinks of his mother when he hears Salamano crying. Perhaps like Salamano, Meursault is used to his mother. He loves her in the sense that he likes having her around because it's companionship. And when she's gone, it's not that he doesn't define it as love. He doesn't see it as this this special thing. He just sees it as some sort of attachment. So he thinks of Maman, and he says for some reason, he doesn't know why, but he doesn't quite go there. He just decides to go to bed. And yet, it seems like he has a lost appetite, which we usually associate with sadness or anxiety or some sort of emotion. So perhaps there is an emotion there, but Meursault is not connected to it. Very interesting moment. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this as well. All right, let's review some questions and concepts from this chapter. First of all, is physical attraction enough of a reason to be with someone? So we tend to have this societal ideal that a relationship should be mostly about some sort of like spiritual love. Like there's this immense attraction in terms of not just physical affection, but something beyond that. Some sort of elevated concept of needing someone else. But for Meursault, that is not what a relationship is about. And for many people throughout the centuries, that's not what relationships have only been about. Perhaps they're about security. Perhaps they're about supporting someone. Perhaps you're just used to that person and you can't imagine your life without them. So that that question, what is love or what is a relationship, and is there a uh, universal truth to what it should be? I'm also interested in what your truth is. So that personal, societal, universal again. Must two people have the same kind of love for each other? So is it okay to love someone in a different way or for a different reason? Or is that going to create problems that can't be solved in the relationship? We can also think about how cycles of abuse come up in this chapter. Salamano's relationship with the dog, and perhaps even Meursault's relationship with Marie in telling her he doesn't love her, and yet she still is attracted to him and still stays with him. So that's something to think about. I'm not going to speak too much on that because I'm not really an expert, but I'm interested to hear what you guys know about this. Also, I mentioned before the absurdity of human emotions, how there's kind of a meaninglessness, a strangeness to the way that we interact with the world and the way we feel. And then moral authority or a lack thereof. So, is there any source of authority that says who gets to choose what is right and what is wrong? Or is it an absurd world where there is no authority? And if there is no true authority, then how do the fake authorities, government, parents, societal pressures, how do those, so-called existentialist fake authorities still impact the way that we live? Chapter 5. Some new characters. We have Masson. He's one of Raymond's friends, and he invites Raymond and Meursault and Marie to spend Sunday at his beach house with him and his wife. Of course, this is an ill-fated trip, and we'll see more about that in a little while. The Arab, the nameless person who seems to change everything when he crosses paths with Meursault. He's apparently the brother of Raymond's mistress, and so Raymond has it out for him already. And when they spend the day at Masson's beach house, Meursault kills this Arab man with Raymond's gun. The crime is apparently motiveless, and the Arab has done nothing to Meursault. The Arab's mysteriousness as a character makes Meursault's crime all the more strange and difficult to understand. We don't know who this person is, and so we don't really have a lot to work with when we're trying to analyze the situation. We only really have the actions, which is so wonderfully existentialist and absurd. We're really only given the facts and a few details, and then we have to, as readers, decipher them and decide what is right and what is wrong and what is true, which is very much like living in the world according to existentialism. Here's a little the more you know moment. An Algerian author wrote a novel in response to The Stranger. It's called The Meursault Investigation, because in The Stranger, Camus does not give names to any of the Arab characters that the protagonist, Meursault, encounters in Algeria, including this man, the Arab, who he murders. And so this author was bothered by the lack of identity, and I apologize if I pronounce his name wrong. Kamel Daoud wrote The Meursault Investigation in 2013, and it narrates the story from an indigenous Arabic Algerian perspective. So he names the characters and develops the characters who are not given names. And he says Algeria, he makes Algeria more than just a setting for existential questions posed by a French novelist. So we are focusing, very much on these existential questions. But later on, we now have an author who says, yes, but there are also questions beyond the philosophical. There are questions that relate more so to social and colonial issues. So this is very interesting. I have not read it myself personally, but if you do read it or you do get your hands on it, please let me know. I would love to hear what you think about it. And I'm hoping that this will be some summer reading pretty soon. All right, so what happens in chapter 5? Well, Meursault talks to Raymond on the phone. They make plans to spend Sunday at the beach house. Raymond mentions he's being followed by Arabs, one of whom is the brother of his former mistress. Also, there's a marriage proposal, a dinner at Celeste's, as usual, and more on Salamano and the dog. Here we go, some more quotations. Here's the marriage proposal. That evening, Marie came by to see me and asked if I wanted to marry her. I said it didn't make any difference to me, and that we could if she wanted to. Then she wanted to know if I loved her. I answered the same way I had the last time, that it didn't mean anything, but that I probably didn't love her. So why marry me then? She said. I explained to her that it didn't really matter and that if she wanted to, we could get married. Oh, how frustrating that he won't make a decision, that there's no meaning in this to him. And yet she still presses him. Then she pointed out that marriage was a serious thing. I said, no. So to Marie, we have an obvious difference in worldview here. To Marie, marriage, this institution of the state, of religion, it's something that's to be taken seriously. And he doesn't mince words, he simply says no. He disagrees. And so she's silent for a while, and then she asks if he would have accepted the proposal from another woman in the same way. And he said, sure. Then she said she wondered if she loved me, and there was no way I could know about that. So she's kind of speaking out loud, trying to figure out her feelings and trying to figure out what love is in this situation. And his kind of statement to her is that that's none of my business. That's about you. This is your own worldview and decision. It's very frustrating, and I can imagine Marie feeling very hurt in this situation. And then at the same time, I can also understand where Meursault is coming from. There are many people who have questioned marriage and what marriage means. The meaning of marriage has changed over the years, depending on cultural circumstances, and it means different things in different countries. So it's understandable that it wouldn't, maybe have meaning to Meursault. And at the same time, it's not that he doesn't like marriage as an institution, it's that it doesn't really matter to him either way. He's not immoral. Again, he's amoral. He doesn't believe in right or wrong either way. And now here's a rather long quotation that's about Salamano. And Meursault's checking in about the dog, and Salamano tells a little bit of his backstory. So I'm just going to be silent for a moment here and let you read this on your own. So one thing I wanted to point out here is he's talking about how he hadn't been happy with his wife, but he'd pretty much gotten used to her. So again, we have a relationship that is not a fairy tale romance. It's more practical, and when his wife dies, he's lonely, despite the fact that it wasn't like this, blossoming romantic situation. He needs companionship, and he found it in this dog. Um, so it's another interesting slice of life that allows us to reflect on what we think about relationships and love and what they're for, and what it means to need somebody or something, um, perhaps beyond our romantic ideals. And then there's a little moment where Salamano connects with Meursault. He reaches out to him. And he says that he realized that some people in the neighborhood thought badly of me, Meursault, for having sent Maman to the home, but he knew me and he knew I loved her very much. Meursault reflects on that. He says, I still don't know why, but I said that until then I hadn't realized that people thought badly of me for doing it, but that the home had seemed like the natural thing, since I didn't have enough money to have Maman cared for. This leaves things so ambiguous. It's so hard to tell if he did love Maman. We do know that he is a practical person. He does things when he feels they need to be done, for his own comfort and what makes sense to him. And that is reflected in this. But it's interesting to see Salamano's perspective on him. He assumes that there is a love there. Perhaps to Salamano, love is a comfort, right? It's being used to something. It's needing some company. And so for him, looking at Meursault, I think he can see that there was a bit of that going on, or he'll assume that there was a bit of that going on for Meursault and his mother, that there was this companionship, and that Meursault was doing what he felt was the right thing. It's a very interesting moment there. And then the last line of this chapter. He gave a little smile, and before he left, he said, I hope the dogs don't bark tonight. I always think it's mine. Oh my goodness. I included this quotation because I think it's very easy to think of Camus as a very cold writer, as someone who's like Meursault. He's very much practically minded, thinking about philosophy and big ideas and kind of putting emotion aside so that we can think. But there's a hint here that Camus has a real sense of the internal human experience, that he's not all thinking brain, that there's some emotion there too. And Salamano represents that vulnerability that Meursault doesn't have. And so, we have to remember that Albert Camus is generating all of this, that he has to be in touch with both characters like Meursault and characters like Salamano and characters like Marie. And just because we have the first-person narrative of Meursault, that doesn't mean that is who the author is. So that's why I included this. I thought that was an interesting show of the author's dynamic sense. He can go from a very sharp and clinical tone to a more subtle emotional tone, from Meursault to Salamano. All right, so for this chapter, I would think about ambition versus lack of ambition. So this is something we didn't really touch on in the quotations, but there is that section where Meursault's boss offers him a promotion and Meursault says, it doesn't really matter to me, and his boss gets very mad. So you can think about what it means to be ambitious. When I was a teenager, everyone was asking me what I wanted to do when I grew up, what my ambitions were. And I, at the time, really didn't have any. And I felt like there was something wrong with me. And I ended up being fine. I turned out all right. And every once in a while, I kind of get in touch with some sort of ambition that I have. Like perhaps it's something small, like, oh, I want to record an album in the next 10 years. Or I'd really like to read more. But even if I didn't have those goals, it wouldn't, in my opinion, make me a less worthy person. And yet, we kind of expect people on a societal level, that's part of our societal morality, to be ambitious. But if we are in a meaningless world, or if we are in a state of detachment like Meursault is, then perhaps getting a promotion at a job is only as meaningful as the experience of washing your hands and using a nice dry towel at lunch. Are there going to be 2 towels so that they don't get soaked by the end of the day? And that's what your promotion means? Because if that's true, then maybe Meursault would go for it. We can also think about Meursault's refreshing honesty. Imagine the scene with Marie, the marriage proposal scene, if Meursault had tried to play along and he told her, yes, I do love you, and, I'd love to get married to you. It's only you, baby. It may be even worse than the actual situation where he is honest. So it's kind of nice to see a character who tells it like it is. So that's refreshing, even if we don't like what he says. And then finally, how do people create meaning in their lives? How does Salamano tell his life story? How does Marie tell her love story? How do the people in Celeste Cafe create some sort of meaning out of eating lunch? And how do you create meaning in your life? And chapter 6, the last in this lecture. A few more characters. Nope, no more characters. We'll have to get rid of that slide. Online learning, people. Super exciting. All right, the overview. A day at the beach goes terribly wrong. We could just leave it there. But basically, this is the part where everything changes. This is the climax, the turning point. At first, Meursault stops Raymond from killing an Arab man who he claims to have a conflict with. Raymond gets badly cut up. And then Meursault, ironically, after trying to stop Raymond from killing this man, ends up killing one of the Arab men in the literal heat of the moment. It's very hot outside. Let's look at some quotations. First of all, Raymond asked me, should I let him have it? I thought that if I said no, he'd get himself all worked up and shoot for sure. All I said was, he hasn't said anything yet. It'd be pretty lousy to shoot him like that. And then later he says, right, but if he doesn't draw his knife, you can't shoot. So Meursault is actually thinking in a societal manner here. He knows the law. It's much like the law at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet, where if someone starts the fight, they are liable to be tried for it. In this case, if this guy isn't trying to fight him, he can't claim self-defense if he shoots him. And so Meursault is thinking from that perspective. What would happen to you legally if you were to shoot him without any cause? And on that page he says, it was then that I realized that you could either shoot or not shoot. That's a great quotation for the concept of choice. That, no matter what the circumstances are, you could shoot or not shoot. These are choices. And again, there's some irony later on in the story because of this line. Meursault doesn't really choose to shoot or not shoot. he kind of is in a blur and just does it. So that's an interesting moment if you're interested in writing about choice or talking about choice and free will. So this is the moment before he shoots. The sun, the heat, all that heat was pressing down on me and making it hard for me to go on. And every time I felt a blast of its hot breath strike my face, I gritted my teeth, clenched my fists in my trouser pockets, and strained every nerve in order to overcome the sun and the thick drunkenness it was spilling over me. With every blade of light that I don't think that's supposed to say hashed. Flashed off the sand from a bleached shell or a piece of broken glass, my jaws tightened. So here that sensuality is taking over. And so you can either shoot or not shoot. But Meursault is also, we have this third factor. There's, this, that, plus the senses. Two choices plus the senses interfering. And for many people, it's also emotions interfering and circumstances. There's many things that go into choice. It's not really a black and white either or decision that people tend to make, which is very interesting to think about when you're considering free will. He realizes that he has a choice. He says, "It occurred to me that all I had to do was turn around, and that would be the end of it. But the whole beach, throbbing in the sun, was pressing on my back. I took a few steps toward the spring." So he's going with that physical instinct. And there's more wonderful language. The sea carried up a thick, fiery breath, talking about the sharpness, the heat of the beach and the sky. It says, my whole being tensed and I squeezed my hand around the revolver. The trigger gave. So we don't really get any sense of his choice here other than how he's being influenced by the heat. So I put this quotation in here because this is really all we have to go off of when it comes to Meursault's intentions and his actions. It's very sensual and at the same time very clinical. So we only get the action and a little bit of his feeling of his bodily feelings. He knows that he has ruined this harmonious beach trip. And without any motive spoken, he says at the very end, "Then I fired 4 more times at the motionless body where the bullets lodged without leaving a trace. And it was like knocking 4 quick times on the door of unhappiness." So we don't know why he does this. He doesn't express why he does this. He just does it. And how frustrating that the turning point, the most important moment in this whole book, comes with no explanation. Ah, Camus, if you were trying to tell us about the absurd, you sure did it here. So we can think again about physical sensations, how much they govern our lives. Also, those in terms of free will. So Meursault seems to live his life by choice, but he's also governed by his bodily responses. And Shmoop says, Meursault continually uses pleasant sensations to escape from the painful acceptance of the absurdity of life. However, severe sensations such as the heat or bad smells make him more aware of the oppressiveness of life. Meursault has no defense against these hostile sensations because he allows himself to be passively controlled by his physical life. So we all do this to some extent. We try to avoid suffering by looking for pleasant sensations, even in the most basic sense that, If we're suffering because we're hungry, we look for food. If we are thirsty, we look for water. But also, maybe you had a really bad day, and so you put on your favorite episode of The Office on Netflix. This is also using pleasant sensations to escape pain or suffering. So in some ways we can all relate to this, but for Meursault it's so extreme, and the chance of his situation where he ends up, it's puts him in a place where acting on physical sensation has immense consequences that, maybe eating a bucket of Haagen-Dazs when you haven't eaten anything all day, maybe it doesn't have such extreme consequences as the sun causing you to pull the trigger on a gun. And yet this is all up to sort of the chance of his situation. Or we could say it's up to his choices. I mean, he's the one who made friends with Raymond. He's the one who decided to go back onto the beach. So there's some gray areas here. And we're going to continue to explore this moment and these ideas quite deeply in part 2 of the novel, along with Meursault and his author, Albert Camus. We should also look, before we go, at the consequence of detachment. So when you decide not to engage in your emotions or in the world. Again, from Shmoop, they analyze this quite well, I believe. It says, an additional consequence of Meursault's detachment from life is his indifference to the Arab population. He may view Arabs as faceless objects due to a subconscious prejudice against them. And that's something that there's a lot to be said about that although we have Meursault saying he doesn't care about certain things or saying things don't matter to him, we can't always trust what he says. He is an unreliable narrator. And there are places like him thinking of Maman when Salamano is crying, where we can jump in and say, maybe there is something else there, and he's just not willing to admit it. Maybe there's an emotion there, like a prejudice or a love for his mother, but he just doesn't believe in it. So he's not going to mention it. So there are places there for the reader to do some investigating and some guesswork. And then it continues to say that, however, in another sense, the Arabs have also become outsiders or strangers in colonized society in a different way than Meursault. Their lack of definition suggests the society's detachment from or indifference to its Arab population. So in some ways, Meursault has things in common with the Arabs because he's an outsider, just as they are outsiders in their own country. So that is another fascinating parallel that I would love to see a presentation or paper on. That ends our third lecture. Thank you so much for joining me. I apologize if my voice is starting to go. I have a very dry throat right now. So what better time to take a break than now? And I will see you next time for part 2 of The Stranger.